Well, I first of all just want to say you all sound really good. Well done. To the praise team, thank you so much for just ushering us into that time. But it wasn't just them that sounded good, you sounded good. Isn't God good? God is good in the good times, God is good in the hard times, and God is good in the dreaded after lunch time slot times. So that's where we are at the moment. And grateful to have this opportunity to be with you as we kind of kick into the afternoon and recognizing that, it is after lunch. But we're going to do this session a little bit different in just a few minutes. This is going to be more of a large breakout for all of us, as it were. Like, we're all going to be in this room and space, but there's going to be a lot more questions, a lot more interaction. I recognize we've not really had a lot of chance for interaction and dialogue, so we want to create some space for that here in this time this afternoon and go from there. So in that way, it's going to look a little bit different. I also just wanted to say I've had some really good conversations between the sessions, and one of you, I think, rightly reminded me and said, right now we seem to be in a time where God is doing some amazing things. When we look on college campuses and other places, it does seem that we're in this time, despite the challenges that we face, of significant renewal. And part of my hope and part of my prayer is that what we're talking about here together is going to be journeying with God in that renewal in different ways, to be God's church, perhaps in ways we haven't been before. And so I'm excited about that opportunity. And then I just want to make sure I mention this to you in case any of you are interested, and so I don't forget the detail. Because we are right here in literally this part of the world in Harrisburg, on September 19th and 20th at Messiah College, there will be an event called a Steeple to Street event. I will be there, the Ascent Network and Fresh Expression that we are connected with will be there at that event. And so if this is at all proving helpful, or you're interested in this, or you want to continue the conversation or keep on learning together, I just wanted to put that on your radar. Again, September 19th and 20th, because it's literally almost right here. So I know for some of you that's a problem if you're coming from Indiana, but if you're here in Pennsylvania, that is a great opportunity. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware about that. And then the last thing I wanted to say as we get ready to jump into this afternoon is I hope we spent some time yesterday really talking about heart posture. We spent some time this morning talking about more head language types of things. It's my hope in this last section to be able to pull some of those things together and hold them in tension in a way that's going to let us innovate to move forward. And so part of what I'm going to be inviting you to do is to be thinking about what is it of where you are and where might God be taking us next. As great as it is to gather here, it's always really important to me, and I'll confess this might be a shortcoming of mine at times, but we gather together, it is great to be here, but if we do nothing with it after we leave, then why? And I say that carefully because, again, we just had an amazing time even of worship, and that is enough, but I'm also like, the Lord gives us an amazing opportunity, and we come and we are challenged, or we are inspired, or we learn. If we don't do anything with that, then we miss out on a tremendous opportunity. So it's really important to me that we use some of this last time to sort of ask that what's next question. And part of my goal is going to be to do that in a way that I hope everyone here, regardless of where you feel like you are in your church culture or where you are personally, there's some things that we can think about taking as next steps. So that's my hope, that's my goal in this time together. And with that, again, we're going to be asking a lot of questions around, again, innovate, what does it mean to measure now, what new things, that's all going to be coming our way. So as we get ready to do that, the image that I want to put in your mind here to get us started this afternoon is a number of years ago, I heard this story from Ben Zanders. Ben, at one point, was the orchestra director for the Boston Philharmonic. And he told this great story about two different shoe salesmen who literally went to a third world country. And he said the first shoe salesman got off the plane, and he looked around, and he said, nobody here is wearing any shoes. And he was completely heartbroken and sad and dejected, and he called up his boss, and he said, I've got bad news. You sent me here to sell shoes. Nobody here even wears shoes. Like, it's not even a thing. Put me on the next plane home. And off he went. The second shoe salesman got off the plane and looked around, and with great excitement called up his boss and said, I have great news. Nobody here wears any shoes. What an amazing opportunity. Send me all the shoes that you can send me. And so he did. And I've always loved that story because it was the exact same set of circumstances, but viewed entirely differently, and really choosing to measure different things, choosing to measure opportunity or choosing to measure defeat and decline. So what would it look like for us to begin to measure possibility and to go forth with that mindset to recognize, yes, there are challenges, but man, there are tremendous opportunities. And again, we gathered together literally this week to celebrate all that God has done the last 200 years. But it's not just a celebration of the last 200 years, there's been challenges in that as well. And so as we look ahead, yes, there are challenges, but there are incredible opportunities as well for the next 200 years. And so how do we live into that? And that's the invitation for us here this afternoon. I love this reminder from Alvin Toffler. He says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I think that's pretty appropriate for us as disciples of Jesus Christ who are always in the journey of learning together. And I think God's church, because it's not static, because it's not a one-model-fits-all program, is the perfect place to continue to learn and relearn and be renewed in new ways. And again, I hope that's happening for us here this week. So the biggest question I'm going to be asking you, just be literally wrestling with in your own heart and mind, is this question: Lord, what would you have of me? So again, we've come, listened, sang, taken votes, all kinds of things. But Lord, what would you have of me here and then moving forward? What does that begin to look like? And here are just some of the questions that I want to ask you to begin to reflect on. What is it that I need to measure in my mind or in my heart? What have I been measuring that I need to pause? It's not helpful. It's not yielding fruit. What do I need to stop measuring? What do I need to start measuring that I haven't been that could be more useful moving forward? And as I'm thinking about these different measurements, what is it that would keep me from doing the measuring? Is it what we would call a failure of understanding? Like, I don't even quite understand what I'm trying to measure. Or would it be a failure of nerve? Lord, I know exactly what you want me to measure, but I'm not sure I want to do that. I know what I should stop measuring, Lord. I'm not sure I want to do that. And then, what will be our response? So that's really between you and the Lord and your community, but those are questions I want to put on our heart here today. So again, I think one of the ways over and over that we see that we are led into innovation is learning to measure in the midst of the tension that we are in, and that God gives us tremendous opportunities in that way. And then one more reminder before we jump into some other things. I just think this is so important. I mentioned it yesterday, so I want to mention it one more time today. When it comes to leadership, I believe a significant part of it is energizing a community of people toward their own transformation in order to accomplish a shared mission. Why? Because unless we are willing to do that internal work ourselves, we all know it's way easier to point at somebody else and what they should do rather than myself. I have a feeling as I'm going through these questions, they're not overly hard to comprehend in our minds. I do wonder if we take them seriously, what might start to stir in our hearts, even what tensions might be starting to arise. So here's what I'm going to invite us to do, and this is one of those things that I think this is fairly simple, but I'm also hopeful you can even take this back with you. It would be a great conversation to have with your ministry body that you're a part of, your local connection. I want to invite all of you to think about this. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to invite you to give a rating for what we would call the missional or innovative vitality of your church. And 1 is going to be on the super low end of that description, and 10 is going to be we couldn't be more, all right? So that's what I'm going to ask you to do, but I'm going to walk you through how to think about this. And I want you to be thinking about specifically about your local ministry setting and see which of these begin to apply. You're going to be in the 1, 2, 3 range if these things apply. That you would have what we call many laggards. That is, people who just will not get on board no matter what you do. We don't have any innovators. We may not even know what innovation is. There might be an active or hostile resistance to change of any kind. Maybe there's a whole lot of work that just needs to be done. Maybe there's a very minimal missional DNA present. Maybe you are one of the very few with a missional heart. Maybe there's just a very insular focus. Like, we just want to take care of ourselves. There might even be a hostility to reaching out. We have very much a scarcity or survival mindset that pervades everything. Maybe there's a lot of conversation about the glory days and what used to be. And man, there's just a sense of grief that we're not there anymore. Maybe there's, people were honest, a sense of, we wonder, can new birth even happen here? or maybe little, if any, kind of outreach ministry is happening. If you feel like your setting matches a lot of those, the culture where you are, you're going to be in that 1 to 3 range. You're going to be in the mid-range, 4 to 6, if some of these things are present. You might say, well, we have some innovation. There are some new things going on. We're at least willing to try it. But here, maybe the biggest thing is not an active resistance, but just inertia. Like, it's just hard to get over the hump and get beyond our own comfortability. So there's not hostile resistance, but we're not really sure we want to move forward past that inertia. There might be a desire to reach out in some capacity. So again, at least there's something happening there. Maybe you have some outreach programs going on. Maybe there's a food pantry outreach, maybe a clothing drive, blood drive. Maybe you're supporting youth in different ways, but they rarely result in any further connection in ministry. Maybe key leaders do exist to focus on outreach, but the mindset is not owned by everybody. So it's more than just you. There's a group of you, but it's certainly not pervasive through your church or ministry setting as a whole. Maybe some resources in your church are given to missional outreach or innovation. Again, outreach might happen, but it tends to be siloed. It's not something that goes through every part of our DNA. Maybe the primary mindset is that real church still can only happen on Sunday morning in our facility at a set time in a certain format. Anything else doesn't really count. There might be some openness to reaching new people in new ways, even if we're not sure how to do it. And maybe there's a lot of good hearts to connect with new people, but maybe the biggest issue is we just don't know how to do it. Like, we want to, we're not sure how to get there. If those are descriptions of your ministry setting, you're going to give yourself 4, 5, 6 range. Then you're going to be in the upper range if this is your reality, where you would say, innovators are our norm. Like, they're just always popping up and doing things. People are going out and trying new things. We frequently are hearing of things going on we didn't even know were happening. There's an active ownership and a missional mindset by everybody. In fact, outreach, connection, new ways of doing things, it's just part of who we are in everything that we do. So there's an entire church posture around encouraging, promoting, experimenting, innovating, incarnational thinking. Maybe stories of vitality are regularly celebrated in your setting on a regular basis. There's actually systematic efforts to move in this direction, to foster a missional mindset in everything that we do. There's also no longer the expectation that church would only be on Sunday mornings. The church is happening all the time in different places. Things like creativity and innovation are highly valued. And there's an outward focus to share the love of Jesus with whoever may not know it. Like, that's just a part of your heartbeat. If that is a good description, or a lot of those of you, you're going to be in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range. So I want to invite you to go ahead and I'm going to give you a moment here. You can talk about it at your table if you want, or just sit in reflection. I don't care. But I'm going to give you a minute or two here. Just think through that, and just do me a favor. Literally write the number down, or it's only one number. I guess you can remember it as well. That's totally fine. But just go ahead and give a few moments of reflection before we continue. Thank you. Much. Great. Thank you. As you're doing this, try not to think of this as good or bad, or this is just where you are. That's the biggest thing, is you're trying to accurately get a gauge of where you are. All right, just take about 30 more seconds. I know we can have a lot of conversation on this. I'm just trying to prime us. So just about 30 more seconds. All right. Let's come back together here a second. We're going to have a chance for more interaction, but let me invite you back at the moment. Just to help me out and to have a sense, and remember, none of these are better or worse. In fact, I will tell you there are some pros and some cons to each one of them, okay? So, but with that, keeping that in mind, if you were a church that you feel like we're in that 1 to 3 range for whatever reason, or a ministry setting, can I just see your hand if you feel like, hey, we're in the 1 to 3? Yeah? Okay, great, that's helpful. See if hands. If you feel like we're in that 4 to 6, can I see your hand there? Okay, see a lot of hands there, right? And then just tell me out again, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. Awesome. Great. Super. So again, I said part of my hope and goal is that no matter where we are, figuring out, discerning a next step, what that might be, what that might look like. So here's what I would suggest to you is I've worked with different churches and had conversations and even what we've experienced ourselves in my own setting. I would suggest this. If you see yourself as being in the first stage, that 1 to 3 range, I would submit to you, I believe the biggest issue, or I'll say barrier you are facing, is what I would call a heart issue. Because until that heart changes, there's not going to be a willingness or an openness to innovate, to engage in new ways, to move in this incarnational way. And last time I checked, I've tried really hard because I can be pretty stubborn. I cannot change anyone's heart. I try really hard and I fail every single time. And then my memory is short and I think I can do it and I can't. Therefore, the only way I know of that a heart is going to change is by a work of God and the Spirit. And so if this is a place where you feel like you are, the very first thing I'd suggest to us that we would want to do and look at is how do we focus more on prayer and literally invite God to change our hearts, to break our hearts in line with the kingdom. You also, at this stage, I want to encourage you, especially if you're a permission giver in your setting, this is a great opportunity still to seek out shining eyes and pioneers and just bless them. I say this carefully, but I want to err, in this case, on the side of ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Because if there is somebody who gets it, and you can support them and walk through it with them, send them, empower them, bless them. One of the other things I'd really encourage you to do at this stage, if there is somebody in your ministry setting that you look at them and you're like, I think they have these gifts of pioneering, or there's something about them that I think they could do this, or you can sense that they're excited with you, can I invite you to do this? Have at least 1 cup of coffee with them and invite them to join you in this, or at least say to them, I see these gifts in you. Would you consider partnering with me in this way or consider leading an initiative in this direction and lay it out for them? I invite you to do that because it is a no-lose situation. If you invite that person out to coffee and you sit down with them and you say, I see these gifts in you, if they look at you and they say, well, thanks, but no thanks, or thanks, but no, the worst thing that has happened is that you've seen them, affirmed them, and encouraged them. That's not a loss. And they might look at you and say, I never thought of that. Okay. And you start to walk together. Those are the things that start to change the posture of a heart of a congregation as new opportunities begin to arise. I think particularly Bible studies on the book of Acts and Jesus himself are very helpful in this type of scenario because we see Jesus doing this stuff all the time. We see the early church in Acts doing this stuff all the time. I think you can design sermon series in this direction because, again, the key issue is that hearts need to be softened. And who you're mainly going to have here, it may not be the whole church, but you want to focus on finding at least 1 or 2 innovators, pioneers, or we could call them early adapters who are going to be part of this journey with you. Find those people, empower those people, walk with those people, meet with those people. And as you do, it changes your church, your culture. So it's a hard issue. If you are in that middle range, I would suggest it's not so much a heart issue because, hey, there's an openness already. Usually the biggest barrier here is we just aren't sure what steps to take next. So I would say it's an implementation issue or a mind issue at this point. So you're going to keep doing the things that we were already doing. We want to be praying. We want to seek out shining eyes. We want to empower them and give permission. But now you're going to start to take steps with perhaps your leadership board. You're going to start to make some strategic implementation steps to say, we're going to be doing some concrete things to make sure we are moving in this direction. We talked about APEST yesterday. Maybe it's shared with your entire congregation. You start to learn what everyone's gifts are, and you can help them move in alignment with those gifts. Again, Bible studies, sermon series, all of those kinds of things that are going to move us from neutral to proactive. And now you're going to have not just some early pioneers on board with you. You're not going to have not just the early adapters. You're going to start to have other people as they learn and hear more about this. Those people that were not on board just because they didn't understand it, the more you educate them, the more they hear stories, their hearts will change and your culture and your church will start to change with it. And then if you're in the 8, 9, 10 range, you're going to keep doing some of these same things. You're going to keep on praying. Like, we're never going to give that up or stop that. But you're going to start to learn to share stories on a regular basis, maybe at leadership boards or in the Bible studies or on Sunday morning in worship, sharing the stories of some of the innovation and vitality that's happening. You want to weave this into your discipleship formation, because remember, we replicate what we celebrate. And so if we are lifting up these ways that God is moving in innovative ways, we want that to be our norm. We want discipleship to be about living in the model of Jesus. And remember, the model of Jesus, what did he do? He raised up others. He raised up other disciples. And again, as we saw in the video earlier this morning, the goal was not just to raise up disciples, but disciples who would do even more than him. That's what we want in our settings as well. So now you're going to have the innovators that you're setting forth. You've already got your early adapters with you and adopters. You're going to have the early majority, and then we'll have what we call the late majority. And that is some people who maybe they were resistant at first. Maybe it took some extra time, extra nudging, extra stories to hear, but as you do that enough, Jim Collins talks about the flywheel effect. As you do that enough, even the late majority will get on board with you. And then let's just name it. Some people, no matter what you do, Jesus himself could come back and stand in front of them and do a wonderful miracle. They're still going to say no, for whatever reason. We just accept that, and we bless them, and we move on, usually around them, while still loving them. I don't know where you are in your journey today, but I just want to invite you that by hopefully getting a sense of where you are in your culture, you can also figure out what we can start to do next. If it's near the very beginning, we're going to increase our focus on prayer, and I'm going to commit to finding at least 1 or 2 people to have coffee with and say, I see these gifts in you and this heart passion. Would you join me in it? If you're in that middle range, we're going to start to have some conversations with our leadership team that what is happening organically is not a mistake. We're going to figure out how to strategize and put it into place. If you are at the upper level, you're going to be looking for even more pioneers to be sending out. You're going to find ways to organically be sharing the stories that are happening on an ongoing basis so that momentum can occur, because that's the real issue at 8, 9, and 10. You want to build on what is already happening so that continued momentum can occur. No matter where you are, there's something for all of us to take. So keeping your measure in mind, again, just what is one step you can take personally, and what's the next step you can take in your ministry setting? That was just 2 questions I'd invite you to take with you today, to think about, to pray about, and to commit to with God. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, then we're going to have a little bit of time of reflection, and then we'll have some conversation. We've been talking a lot about this whole idea of moving into your next 200 years around the idea of innovation. So I want to ask you, what do you most need to measure right now so that innovation can occur in your setting? I've mentioned earlier, in terms of listening, maybe you would say, you know what, we do recognize we don't know in our own community exactly what's going on or where they're hurting the most or where we could journey with them most specifically. If that's where you are, maybe a set of questions would be these. You can ask these questions to anyone, by the way. I literally just asked these to the person who cut my hair a few weeks ago. I was blown away by the conversation that ended up happening. But I asked, what do you love about this particular community? What are the biggest challenges we face in our community? And if a group of good people came together to make a difference, what could they do? Those are questions you can ask anyone, because if they live in the community, they care about the community. And you don't have to guess about what the needs are. They are directly telling you. Maybe that's a place that you can begin. Another question, or what do you most need to measure now? Here's some other things. We talked this morning, what would it look like to start measuring our pioneers? How many we have, how many we want to raise up? What would it look like to measure how many supporters we have? What would it look like to measure how many permission givers we have? How about this one? I tried to give you a variety of options, and I want to be really clear on this. You heard me talk about the pajama factory and a weekly meal, or the Wednesday meal, that's a weekly thing, or having a weekly rugby practice. Please do not hear that in any way that those are things you should do. I'm not even saying you need to do something weekly. Maybe your prototype is with one person who tries one thing for 3 or 4 weeks just to see what happens. Like, scale it to where you are. But, hey, what's an experiment or two we could try? What if we started to measure how many experiments we're taking? And to be very clear, the key question with an experiment is not, did it work? It's, what did we learn? That's the question that we want to be asking. And based on what we learn, we iterate and take our next experimental step. Maybe a question that you want to be measuring is, what exactly are our gifts and wirings as a church? We're going to start to measure those more carefully. What if you said, you know what, we're going to take a season and we're just going to start to measure how many conversations we have with people not connected with our church or not connected with the faith at all? What would that look like? Maybe you want to measure your APESTs. How many apostles do we have? How many prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers? And go from there. What would it look like to measure the condition of our mind or our heart and try to give some language to that? So those are just some questions I would invite you to think about. That again, as you're trying to think about innovation and moving forward, those are questions I currently am wrestling with, which force me to think about different metrics than anything that we've done in the past, and perhaps that is helpful to you as well. I also want you to be encouraged, church. In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, we hear, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." When I look at that in my setting, part of what the translation in my head is, you will be my witnesses in First Church, in Williamsport, in Lycoming County, in Pennsylvania, into the rest of, wherever, right? God calls us for such a time as this, and you receive this Holy Spirit power. We don't do this alone, which is awesome. I'm not asking you to rely on your own gifts and abilities. God, through the Holy Spirit, empowers us for this time. And so please know that. Please remember that here today. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just literally read a couple questions for you. Then I'm going to give you some time to talk about whatever question you want at your table. And then we're going to just take some extended time for questions and answers. Or not answers, questions and dialogue, because I don't have the answers. I will just dialogue with you. But maybe throughout our time, maybe there's something that's been bugging you. Bring it up. I'm really glad. You can bring anything you want up, because I didn't know this was going to happen, but Shannon Kaiser is with us. She's our national director. Anything I can't answer, she will. So bring it on. It'll be good. But I want you to, maybe something bugging you, maybe there's something that you want to affirm, maybe there's something you need more clarification on, whatever it might be. I'm going to invite you to talk around your tables or yourself, and you'll have some freedom to ask that. But here's some questions just to get you started. At your tables, right now, what's the biggest question you have? Like, we spent a lot of time yesterday and today, what's nagging at you? What do you want to know more about? It's the biggest question that you have. Maybe this is a question you're thinking about. What tension do you most intensely feel? If I had time to be with every one of you, I'd love to hear that. Tell me where you're really feeling the tension and what that is like for you. How about this? What is a conversation that you know you need to have with your leadership team? Like, I've been putting it off. I wasn't aware I needed to, but now there's some clarity. What might that be? What internal work do you need to do? It's so easy for me to want to blame my board or our volunteers. No, Matt, what internal work do you need to do? That's where you need to start. And then, maybe what measurements have been helpful the last 200 years, but moving forward, they're probably not going to be too helpful. Maybe that's a question you want to wrestle with. And last one here. What have you been measuring, again, that's no longer helpful? What do you need to start measuring for a new day? So we'll come back to that last picture in a minute. Pick any of those questions, or may they be a starter for you about what you want to talk about. I'm going to give you 5 minutes or so, talk at your tables, and then we're going to come back and just have more of a group discussion, since we really haven't had much time for dialogue with one another. So go ahead and chat. All right, if I can go ahead and call us back together. I hope some ideas are starting to stir in your own heart, soul, mind for yourself, for your ministry setting, whatever that might look like. I hope that you're being challenged around what innovation moving forward might look like. But I'd love to hear some questions and thoughts. Heather is graciously going to move around bring the microphone to anybody who has a thought, a question that you want to share. It can be a question. If it's a thought you want to lift up, that's wonderful too. But I'd just like us collectively to have a little bit of time to do this because, again, we haven't had much of a chance to do that to this point. And as Heather shared earlier, we've had a lot kind of thrown at us in a variety of ways. So help me out a little bit. What is on your mind? Over here, yes.
You mentioned a little bit about it, but if maybe you just go into a little more depth of what were some of the initial barriers you faced when trying to implement some of the new fresh expressions?
Yes, thank you. What were some
in your specific
in our specific
church?
setting? Some of the initial barriers that we faced. Absolutely. Barrier one was that we expected some immediate results, and the reality was after 6 months we had nothing to show. Like literally nothing, other than somebody who was giving most of his time, Mitch, giving most of his time and attention to this, and we literally had nothing to show. Number two, we thought the biggest way to go about this was a big splash, and so we initially made a big push with the congregation. In retrospect, I think what we would have done and what we've tried to do a better job of since then is do more of a slow drip. And I share that to say the big push felt like one big wave that came and then went. And unfortunately, I mean, we do that a lot of times with programs as well. We don't want this to be a program, we want this to be a way of being in our church, literally down to our DNA. And so that was a challenge. And then the third one would be just, I would call the congregation's willingness to see the validity and legitimization of it. For a whole lot of people, for a long time, and let me be very clear, we have not arrived. We are in messiness all the time, so I want to be super clear about that. But I would say that for a lot of people, it was almost like, we'll bless it by nodding our head and saying, that's cute that you're doing that, but it was sort of like, real church is still Sunday morning, that's church light, that's church JV, those kinds of things. And so really helping the congregation understand, nope, this is real ministry work. It's just as real church as what we're doing on Sunday morning. It just looks different. So all of those were some of the barriers that we had and to some degree still have. It's something we're still working on. Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. Other questions, thoughts?
I'm coming.
Yeah.
He's bringing you a mic.
There you go. All right.
So if a church were to transition from a more traditional model to a fresh expression, something that looks a little more innovative, how does one make it work? How does one make the dollars and cents work? Because it's like the pajama factory.
Yes.
There's a cost to provide the food, and someone's making ties to do that.
Yes.
And I don't mean to be crass, but that's
that's always a great right. Practicality, dollars and cents wise. How do you make this work? What does that look like? Excellent question. A couple responses to that. One, I think scalability is a big deal. So I would not say to any of us, hey everybody, you need to go out and start providing a weekly meal every week for 50, 60, 80 people, which can be a lot. If you are going to do that in some way, there usually are a variety of ways to meet that cost. Grants exist in different communities. Sometimes business partners are willing to help subsidize in that way and contribute with you because they know that you're making a difference in the community. So that would be a possibility. I know for us, in our instance, in our denominational body at the time, we received a grant that let us get started. Now, we knew when we got the grant that on the front end we had a lot of help, but then we knew over time we were going to have to pick up more and more of that, which we did. But the grant helped us get started. But the other thing that I would say is this does not have to, and one of the things I love about Fresh Expressions personally, it doesn't have to cost much finances almost at all in some ways. So I showed you the example of the rugby group. That could be and was primarily all volunteer-led, and they met on a public field, so I guess there was the cost of the rugby ball or whatever that thing is called. But like literally almost no cost. And a number of our groups are like that. Here's one. This is one of my favorite ones right now. And again, I just learned this 2 weeks ago. We have an older couple in our church. They've been married over 70 years. Back years ago, they were missionaries. In more recent years, they've been part of our congregation, retired, living in their own home. 3-4 months ago, they moved into a nursing home. I just learned that these two started a worship service in the nursing home every 2 weeks. I didn't know about it. It costs us nothing. And when this was shared with me, I was like, I guess once a missionary, always a missionary, right? Because at the end of the day, this isn't about the dollars and cents, it's about the heart posture. And Chuck and Donna are their names. And man, if you met Chuck and Donna, and it will be literally to the day they die, they'll do anything they can, anywhere they are, to share the love of Jesus. And right now, they're in a nursing home, and so that's their mission field. And they're doing an amazing job, and it costs us nothing. So scalability, grants, community partners, and the right mix in that way. Yeah, great question.
I've got one over here.
Yes.
So were there any rules, spoken and written down or unspoken, that you found yourself tripping over as you had these new expressions beginning organically? And a couple that I can think of,
Yeah.
I know in our church I've got a couple of guys that would love for me to come to a bourbon and Bibles. But we're voting like tomorrow on making that something that, church function couldn't do.
Right.
Other examples might be something like invited to a poker game. To participate in that and kind of build community. Are there things that you found that we should be thinking of as far as our structures and some of the rules that we put in place or have to deal with that have been stumbling blocks to these new expressions?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And my first response to that is I think that just takes a lot of honest dialogue and trust between the governing authority and those who are seeking to live into the fresh expression realities. And therefore, I think it's going to look a little bit different in most settings. Because like in our setting, this was not a barrier. We had they met on Zoom for a very long time, whiskey and the word. Now for us in our setting, that was something we felt like we could do and allow for a variety of reasons. In our setting, if you're talking about like the poker one, that would be one that we would say no at this particular point, and we would go into the reasons for that why. But what we want to emphasize in that is, and I think part of what you're raising there, there's talking about tensions. There's always a tension between the standards that we live into and uphold doctrinally, truth, and what that means to look like in extending grace. And the only way I know to navigate that is not through a legislative process. I mean, we do that because we have to at times. But at the end of the day, I find it to be much more helpful relationally to walk through those things. A long time ago, one of the images that was given to me that I found to be super helpful was that lots of times in the church, we tend to act more like a coconut, meaning we have a hard shell and a squishy, soft center. We make it hard to enter into our community. And then once you do, things can be mushy and not set and all of those kinds of things. And really the better approach is more like a peach, which has a soft outer, so people can easily enter in, but then there's a strong core that we build our lives around. And so when you ask that kind of a question, I think what is really needed is to have utter clarity on the core so that that will then guide you of how open we can be on our edges.
Yeah, I have a question here.
Yeah.
Your use of the word tensions a lot has really struck a nerve with me.
Yeah.
So can you give me 2 or 3 things that maybe you are measuring now that have resulted from the tension what measurements are you looking for that have resulted from tension?
So, yeah, sure. So, one thing I cannot emphasize enough, I can stand here today and I cannot say to you again enough that things are still messy for us. We're still figuring this out. I also can't tell you enough all the tears we've gone through and the frustrations. And so I showed you a couple videos of Mitch. Mitch is one of my favorite people in the world. And Mitch and I have done this so many times. He's made me way sharper and better, but we see things so differently. So I'm a big numbers person. And so I want to know how many people showed up at that Acts Network or that Fresh Expression this week and the week after and the week after. And Mitch has been like, Matt, you are missing the point entirely. Now, to me, the number represents a person and a story. But, I'm not just looking at a number, but it helps me process. Mitch has been like, we don't want to measure the numbers, we want to measure the stories. We want to measure how lives are being changed. We want to measure the testimony of somebody whose life is different. In my mind, if we only do that, that's great, but it all becomes kind of mushy. I'm like, I need some structure to move forward. And conversely, I think for me, I need some softening, because I tend to be like, put the structure in place and make sure we work it kind of thing. So that would be a tension for us. A second tension would be kind of the earlier question. We thought we could approach this early on more from a programmatic standpoint versus what I would say the tension of a cultural shift. And so what that meant was give less attention to announcements, give more attention to prayer. Less attention around forcing people to be a supporter, more attention to invitation to be a supporter, that we're in conversation with each other about that. Another tension is what was just raised actually about some of those edges of like what's acceptable or not. Here would be another one for us. I didn't mention this earlier. Who gets to lead a fresh expression? How do we hold them accountable while still setting them free? That's a really hard tension. This is not a perfect answer. Just where we have landed at the moment is we have created we've created a covenant that if you are a leader of a fresh expression group in our setting, you sign that covenant, which is simply an affirmation of all the beliefs that people offer when they join the church. So we know that the core is there. If you're part of a fresh expression, you don't have to sign anything like that. But it's our way of ensuring that in the leadership of these groups, the core of what we need is there. So that would be another one for us of like giving enough flexibility and freedom, but there's got to be something that's holding us together as well. Does that help? Great. Okay. Yeah. Or yeah.
What is your balance between outreach and gospel-driven opportunity, or
Yes.
what is your balance, for your church between outreach, to where it's more social, it's showing love through action, I guess, and then, sharing the gospel?
Yeah.
When does, faith come into it, and when do you challenge?
Yeah. Great.
And how many opportunities? Like you can get, I would think, stretched out if it's just all social.
Correct. So let me try this, and if this doesn't answer that well enough, let me know. Instead of us thinking about instead of saying how balanced do we have to be on outreach or not, or outreach programming of the gospel, what we've actually tried to do is, I lifted up for you earlier the language of gathered and sent. What that allows us to do is to take any activity and kind of see where it is on the scale of gathered to sent, and then adjust accordingly. So I will give you an example. One of the things that we do in the winter in my setting is we have a Code Blue Center. So every night in January, February, and March, since those are usually the coldest nights in general in Williamsport, we open up our facility and it becomes literally a warming center, up to about 30 individuals there. That would be super far on the outreach side. So we'll take something like that and say, we recognize it's already far on the sent side, the outreach side. What happens with the tension? What happens if we introduce some gathered pieces of that? What might arrive? What might be innovated? The individuals who lead our Code Blue wrestled with that very thing, and so they made a decision in the last 2 years. On Sunday evenings, they created an alpha experience, and we opened up the facility an hour earlier, and anybody who wanted to come came to alpha, where we went through scripture, and then they would stay and then spend the night in the warmth. That was a way for us to take a total outreach and bring the gospel in. But again, it's the gathered tension that pulled us that way. Let me give you a reverse example. Our youth ministry has been a pretty traditional ministry. It meets Sunday nights during most of the school year. Sunday morning, Sunday school opportunities for them. I would describe it as pretty gathered in nature, pretty structured, like typical youth ministry. What happens if you take a ministry like that on the gathered side and mix it with the tension of sentness, of the outreachness? We did that. And to the individual, the young lady who leads it now, what emerged from that, and this was really great, like this is total, I would say, innovation, it led to a process where right now, once a month, we have what's called Faith Zone in the Williamsport area middle school, where during the lunch period, students voluntarily can come and meet our youth director, and she can pray with them, take their prayer requests, and share a very brief message. I'm not saying that can happen for everyone, but we were able to work that out. And so here she is on a Wednesday from like 11:30 to 1 p.m. in the public school, having a chance to share pieces of the gospel and reflections of the gospel and be stretched in a way different than our traditional youth ministry. And they get anywhere from 80 to 120 students that show up with that. In the last 2 years, we've been able to start that at the high school level, and we get like 20 to 40 kids there for once a month. My point is, it was gathered, the sent tension allowed those new things to be created. So that's more how we go about with whatever ministry is going on. It's always, if it's more sent in nature, how do we make it more gathered? If it's more gathered in nature, how do we make it more sent?
This guy's been waiting for about 2.5 answers so far. Y'all better step up your game and get Heather's attention, or else we're just going to keep on going.
Well, I think we'll take just a few more questions, and then we'll have to pause soon. But I'll be hanging out after and during the break. Happy to keep having a conversation. But we can get a few more in here before we wrap up.
So Matt, can you as a leader just share for a minute the movie or the film you played earlier with the Sword Master?
Yeah.
It's what we talked about at lunch.
Yeah.
The struggle of a leader shifting from I'm the answer person,
Yeah.
I'm the one in charge, I'm the one that controls all of this. If I'm not here, things fall apart.
Right.
They hired me to do the evangelism.
Right.
The mental shift and the humility that it takes to move out of being the sage on the stage. Can you, from your perspective, what have you done to posture yourself as a leader and shift the dynamic both for you and for the expectations towards you?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think I would say you're giving me too much credit to say, what do I do and what masterful decisions did Matt make? Because the truth is, well, let me say it this way. The simple answer to your question is, it's initially, I think, super hard, and then it becomes delightfully wonderful. So let me say that first. And the reason I say that is I don't give myself credit to say on the front end, hey, Matt, you're trying to do all the answers and be the expert. You should really humble yourself and move in this direction like that. What happened was, and I shared just a little bit of this yesterday, when I was trying harder and harder to do ministry more and more excellently, and after a lifetime, or a part of a lifetime, I should say, of that having worked, to see it no longer work was driving me crazy. And I was starting to kill myself physically, emotionally, mentally, and I didn't know what to do. Until finally, out of desperation, I would say I surrendered. Not because I in my wisdom said, I should surrender. Quite the opposite. I in my stubbornness, I would say by God's grace, brought me to my knees and showed a different way. That was the hard part. The wonderful part is living into this, like increasingly, is more like, yeah, I don't have all the answers, and I don't have to. And in fact, I feel like I increasingly don't trust those people who pretend to have all the answers, because we live in a crazy, challenging swirl of a time. Who has all the answers? Nobody has all the answers. And so to no longer feel that amount of pressure is great. The only problem is I'm a slow learner, and so I know it's wonderful, but then I want to go back to my old instincts. But God keeps working on me. So that's what I would say. God brought me to a place where I'd say I didn't have any other choice, and now I'm grateful God did. How about one more, and then we'll pause. Yeah.
So I don't know if this is on topic or if it's a rabbit trail off of someone else's question. But I did notice you mentioned something about kind of having people sign those, what I would call like a statement of faith to be in those leadership positions. And I kind of want to agree with that approach. But the question I have if you take that approach, is how do you to that person, let's say Ross here wants to come be a leader in the ministry that I'm involved in, and I don't want it to feel almost legalistic or too contractual to him. How do you avoid that contractual feeling while still incorporating that? Because I like that, and I'm kind of missing the how to bridge that there.
Yeah, good. No, that's great. So 2 things to that. When I say covenant, that's a very strong term, but we only, but I think this is significant, we only took the membership vows that people in our church already make. So we didn't add on to that. We didn't give another 43 beyond that. Like, this is what our church for years and years and years has already agreed to. So we didn't feel like we were micromanaging that. So that was one piece. But the other piece is this. The asking to sign a covenant sounds legalistic only when we do it in a vacuum. If we do it in relationship and explain why it's important, and we want to hold ourselves accountable, and I'm going to walk with you in it, and if you have questions about it, let me know, and if you're not sure how it's going to work out in the fresh expression, come talk to me. That didn't feel like somebody was being micromanaged. It was in relationship that allowed that to occur. So, yeah, thank you. These are really great questions. And again, I'm going to hang out afterwards and be here longer. If you have other questions, let me know. Not because I have all the answers, but I'm excited to talk about it and share in our learnings and experiences. And I very much want to hear yours as well. One of my favorite things in being in settings like this is the conversations we get to have and what I learn from you along the way. I want to leave you with this image today because this is super meaningful to me. I've showed you this image a couple times of the guys working out. One of the guys there, his name is Mylan. You actually cannot see him in this picture. When Mylan started joining this group, we called it our Fit Faith group for obvious reasons, he was pretty much a loner. He didn't have many friends. He did not have a sense of community. But as he came to be with these guys and he lifted week after week, and he got to know them by name, and they got to know him by name, and he started to share some of his struggles in life, and they shared their struggles in life, and he realized he wasn't alone, and he realized they weren't perfect, and he wasn't perfect. His own heart began to soften and began to change until he reached the point where he trusted this group of individuals to ask him some of life's big questions. And as he did that, those other guys shared with him about their own journeys and their own faith experience until Mylan got to the place to say he too wanted to have a life of faith. And so he decided and was ready to be baptized, to welcome Christ as Lord and Savior in his life. Now, because Mylan had discovered faith at the Fitness Factory, I was prepared to go there and do the baptism there on that turf, because that's where his faith became real to him. But as we were talking about this, Mylan said to me, well, isn't baptism about new life? Yes. Becoming new in the family of God? Yes. Well, he said, I haven't stepped foot in a church facility in over 10 years because I was really hurt as a kid. But if baptism is about new life and having that old stuff washed away, wouldn't it make sense for me to be baptized in the very place I was once hurt? Whew. Yeah, Mylan, I guess it would. And so now a number of years ago, and this was one of the game changer moments for us. You know, to tell the stories and see a difference. Somebody asked earlier, how does it change in a church? Mylan came to us, and in the very place he had once been hurt, we got to celebrate baptism and new life. And those guys standing there with him, Mitch, Alec, Ryan, they were his community that helped him feel safe to transition from community to discipleship to worship. And on this day, so many of the people in our gathered church congregation, this was the day where they realized, oh, this isn't church light. This isn't church JV. This is real. And so if the fresh expression incarnational living helps people come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior, we will be that kind of church. And I've always actually felt indebted to Mylon for his teaching of us in the gathered church of what this abundant life looks like and can be. And I share that with you because as my kind of parting image with you today, this for me is why I want to be part of Fresh Expressions and incarnational living. This for me is the gospel in real life. This is what I gave my life to. And I will do absolutely anything I can to see more Mylons come to know the love of Jesus. And if I get a chance to tell Mylon's story with anyone that I'm with, I want to do it because there's a whole lot more Mylons out there. And so, church, I just want to say to you today to be encouraged. Receive the power of the Holy Spirit and be your full gathered church self. And be your full sent church self. And as you live into that holy tension, I am confident God will innovate new ways for the gospel to be shared among us. He's done it for 200 years for you. And I trust he'll do it for 200 more and beyond. Thanks be to God. Amen.